Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jack Tuttle, President of Virginians for High-Speed Rail, and welcome to the second installment of our virtual town hall series designed for Virginians to hear from and engage with leading transportation decision makers of the day. I'm pleased to say that over 390 folks have registered for today's program, and that we'll also make it available on our YouTube channel. Virginians for High-Speed Rail was founded in the 1990s to build grassroots support for the Southeast High-Speed Rail corridor. And since that time, our vision has grown to mean reliable, frequent, safe, competitive, comfortable, and yes, fast train service for more and more Virginians. We know that only determined and consistent leadership from the top in government and in industry can transform passenger rail vision into reality. And so today, we bring you Virginia's Secretary of Transportation and the President of Amtrak. Please send your questions via the chat box at any point to our Executive Director, Danny Flogger, who will ask as many as time allows. The Town Hall series is made possible through the support of our sponsors, including Siemens Mobility, JBG Smith, the Timmons Group, Guernsey Tingle Architects, and the Carmel Church Development Group. And now I'll turn it over to Steve Morrison, who leads business development for the Northeast Corridor for Siemens Rail Systems. And he also serves as a member of our board. He'll introduce our speakers, but first, we'd like to show you this brief video from today's sponsor, Siemens Automotive.
More than 150 years ago, the American Railroad was a symbol of progress and prosperity, connecting oceans, transporting pioneers in search of the American dream, then lifting the country out of the Great Depression. But American infrastructure fell behind other nations. Networks shrunk. Congestion prevailed. But now, the power of the past is the force of the future. Investing in rail today will renew America as the land of opportunity through high-wage, high-skilled jobs to build infrastructure that will move goods more quickly and connect people to possibilities with sustainable solutions to address our transportation crisis. Built for excellence, built with pride.
Thank you, Jack. You know, for those of us in Washington who work in or simply care about improved passenger rail, we've been impressed with both the leadership and the real accomplishments Virginia's achieved over the past dozen years. To me, what's been most impressive are two critical dynamics here in the Commonwealth. First, the talented leadership the state's attracted to plan and execute passenger rail growth. And secondly, a group like Virginians for High-Speed Rail pressing forward with the effective, consistent advocacy needed to ensure improved passenger rail stays on government's front burner, where it belongs. On behalf of my fellow board members, I'm extremely pleased and honored to introduce today's town hall guests. They run the two organizations which will make our goals for passenger rail in Virginia become reality, and they're getting the job done. Since 2009, when then Delegate Shannon Valentine led the successful legislative effort for Virginia to partner with Amtrak to extend the Northeast Regional train from Washington to Lynchburg, the trajectory was set. Meanwhile, up the road here in Washington, the guy who literally wrote the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act of 2008, better known as PRIA, had subsequently moved to Amtrak with the job of planning and evangelizing better and faster passenger rail service throughout the United States. Thanks in large part to the work of today's guests, Virginia's and Amtrak's partnership has resulted in a 53% increase in intercity passenger rail service and a 65% increase in ridership. And as we're about to learn, this partnership is only growing stronger. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing the Honorable Shannon Valentine, Secretary of Transportation for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Shannon was appointed Secretary of Transportation by Governor Ralph Northam in January 2018.
Alexa, set an alarm for 15 more minutes.
And oversees a $5 billion multimodal
Alexa, set an
transportation
alarm for
system,
15 minutes.
crossing 7 agencies with more than 10,000 employees. As Secretary, she also serves as Chair of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Secretary Valentine is a former member of the Virginia House of Delegates, where she served on the House Transportation and Courts of Justice committees. Her legislative priorities focused on transportation, economic development, education, and ethics. She led bipartisan efforts to create transparent government, expand clean energy production, and invest in intercity passenger rail for the first time in Virginia's history. Following an assignment as a director of the Transportation Policy Council in 2013 for then Governor-elect Terry McAuliffe's transition team, Ms. Valentine was appointed as the Lynchburg District Representative to the CTB in May 2014. I also have the pleasure of introducing Stephen Gardner, President of Amtrak. The Amtrak Board of Directors appointed Stephen to the position of president effective December 1st, 2020. In this role, Stephen leads the company's day-to-day operations with an emphasis on regaining and growing customers and partners through the strong delivery of Amtrak's annual operating plan and the company's long-term goals. Stephen's also responsible for modernizing Amtrak's products, services, infrastructure, and fleet. And as president, Stephen has oversight for marketing, operations, planning, and asset development, as well as government affairs and corporate communications. And before becoming president, Stephen served in several roles at Amtrak, most prominently being responsible for planning and ensuring that Amtrak kept looking to the future. As I alluded to, prior to Amtrak, Stephen worked in the United States Senate, staffing the Commerce, Science, and Transportation's Subcommittee on Surface Transportation and Merchant Marine Infrastructure, Safety, and Security. And earlier in his transportation career, Stephen held various operating and managerial positions with Guilford Rail Systems, Maine Central Railroad in Maine and Massachusetts, as well as the Buckingham Branch Railroad here in Virginia. Please welcome Shannon Valentine and Stephen Gardner. And now I'll turn it back over to our Executive Director, Danny Plogger, who will moderate and ask questions.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you again to all our sponsors for helping make this town hall series free for all our guests. And I will open it up to the secretary and Mr. Gardner to see if they want to say a few words and begin. Talk about why this is so important and introduce yourselves a little bit beyond all the glowing things that Mr. Morrison said.
Well, first of all, I will say, Jack, Steve, Danny, thank you so much for having us. It is always a privilege and a pleasure to be anywhere with Stephen Gardner. So great to be with you today. Thank you for that very lovely introduction. I was wondering, for anyone who's actually watching today, if you've had the opportunity to introduce Stephen Gardner, he has the most impressive job titles of anybody I've ever introduced. So anyway, just a great day. I will tell you that when I came into this position in the beginning of 2018, I really tried to put together a transportation secretariat from the Port of Virginia, the spaceport, aviation, rail, transit, metro, roads, bridges, highways, trails, everything, working under really three pillars. The first is execution. Just this past spring, even with all that we have lived through, we were able to take across the Commonwealth 3,900 projects, totaling about $21.4 billion over the next 6 years. So being able to execute with excellence is a huge priority for us. The second pillar was more deliberately tying transportation decisions to economic development and opportunity for all Virginians. And so that has been an underlying principle. And then finally, innovation. I was very fortunate early on in this administration to get permission to open an Office of Innovation that crossed all modes of transportation. It's led by a woman named Kathy McGee. But when I think of innovation, it goes beyond technology and applications and communications and fiber. It's really in how we think. How do we think creatively to solve problems? Which ultimately, I believe, is how we arrived at transforming rail in Virginia and to this very day. So with that, I'll turn it over to my partner, Stephen Gardner.
Well, thank you, Secretary Valentine. And as you said, thanks so much to Steve, Danny, Mr. Tuttle. It's been great to be here. You didn't mention it, Steve, in that very sort of overly generous introduction, but I am a Virginian by birth, and I love all 46 states equally that Amtrak serves, but it's a special pleasure to be here with a group of Virginians, and great to be able to join in the chorus of support and admiration for the Secretary and her job at the Commonwealth. Really, the priorities that Shannon mentioned are really line up very well with Amtrak's own priorities. And that fundamentally is why we were able, I think, to put together a great program here and support what has really been the Commonwealth's incredible efforts. And as Jack mentioned in the beginning in describing the really I'll say essential long-term support and advocacy from the Virginians for High-Speed Rail, this program, this effort to expand passenger rail in Virginia has been a many decade-long effort. With the designation of the corridor as a high-speed corridor in '92, through the initiation of the first EIS work, which began in basically that same period and took 10 years until 2002. From that work following on through the number of studies that have been undertaken by the Commonwealth, by Amtrak, by the federal government, it's just been a long and continuous effort to try and develop an expanded service that could really support the tremendous growth and opportunity in the Commonwealth. And it's taken a while to turn that vision into fruition. Some of that time is because these are not easy challenges to solve, but some of it is about the alignment and the will and the focus, and that's what the Secretary has brought along with the governor and a whole cast of supportive folks in Virginia to make this happen. And we at Amtrak are so lucky to have such a leader in Virginia in seeing the value of intercity passenger rail and understanding how it can work as part of a multimodal solution for opportunity and growth and sustainability. So we're just really happy here to talk about, I know we'll get into some of the details, but talk about this program and our support for it, and for the hopefully, even more great things that we'll be able to do together with the Commonwealth, also with North Carolina, a strong partner to the Commonwealth to the south, as we look forward to the future.
Thank you both. One of the things I frequently talk about whenever I give talks or folks ask, and you will both understand this as Virginians, everybody has an I-95 story. And so when folks outside of Virginia go, how did the transforming rail thing come about? Where did all this idea come from? All you have to do is just tell somebody your I-95 story, and then everyone kind of understands why rail is so vital. And so that kind of leads into my first question, and I'll open with Secretary Valentine, which is the big one. The topic of today is, how did this transforming rail in Virginia program come about? And where did the opportunity come from? It seemed to, for people outside of Virginia, it kind of seemed to come out of nowhere.
Well, as Stephen just said, we all know it didn't come out of nowhere. It's been going on. I think looking at passenger rail and making a commitment to it has been going on for a very long time. So in many respects, we are building upon the efforts of so many people before us. I will also say that I have the privilege of working with the best team in government, with Governor Northam and his priorities, Director Jennifer Mitchell, who is Director of the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, the new executive director of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, Nick Donahue and John Lawson, deputy secretaries, amazing team. So I say that. I will also say Stephen Gardner works with one of the best teams with whom I've ever worked. I said to the CEO, Bill Flynn, you have an amazing team. I must say they are very worthy negotiators. And he laughed and shared the compliment. Our 95 story really goes back to my initial introduction when I was talking about innovation. Beginning in 2018, we began doing these corridor improvement studies and looking at major corridors and looking at solutions, multimodal opportunities along corridors. We started with I-81. It was the most unreliable corridor that we have in the Commonwealth. We started there, we moved to 95, we're doing 66. When we were looking at the 95 corridor, it will come as a surprise to no one that the congestion along 95, particularly from Fredericksburg to DC, is some of the worst in the country. We were going through a number of options, and the natural solution was, let's look at building more roads. And we learned through the study that just building one lane, 52 miles from Fredericksburg to 495 in each direction, would cost $12.5 billion. And the worst part of the study was not the cost, which was unaffordable for us. It was on the day we finished, 10 years out, it was just as congested as the day we started. And it was really with that information in heat maps that we really started to look at other ways to look at congestion along the corridor. That is how we got to rail. And it really was looking at the fact that we could expand the capacity, moving passengers and freight along the 95 corridor with rail solution for a third of the cost, and really over basically the same amount of time. And it was with that information, working with the governor and the General Assembly, we did go down to Jacksonville, Florida, working with CSX to see if they would be willing to talk with us about sharing the corridor, to build on discussions that had taken place during the Atlanta Gateway period. And as I said, when we announced the definitive agreements in March, it could have been the shortest conversation in history. The answers were initially no. However, I began to discuss what it would be like if all the passenger and commuter trains were removed from Long Bridge, which is currently owned by CSX. It's a 2-track bridge that we all travel across. Of about nearly 80 trains, about 18 of them are CSX, and the rest are commuter and passenger trains. And if they could have access to their train, to their tracks, servicing their customers with scheduled railroading, improving service, and we were able to build a new bridge across the Potomac and have tracks dedicated just to passenger and commuter rail. And it was at a moment when Jamie Boychuk, who's now an executive vice president at CSX, asked to see some maps. I remember teasing him with, did he ask for the maps to prove to me we couldn't do it? But it was really the maps that showed, well, maybe there's a way. And it was really that conversation that led to the possibility of pulling this partnership together. And then, of course, a fateful day of meeting with Amtrak. And at the time, CEO Richard Anderson and Stephen Gardner. And the idea was born.
Yeah, I guess leading into that a little bit, as Stephen Morrison said, the Virginia Amtrak partnership has been incredibly beneficial to everyday Virginians. So, Stephen, on your side of the coin, how did Amtrak get involved? Where did you see the benefit? And kind of where do you see the partnership continuing?
Yeah, great question, Stanley. So for us, just to step back a little bit, we've got a broad network and some pretty clear goals for our future, which really fall around three basic elements. First and foremost, we view our mandate as trying to create as many alternative trips to driving and flying as we can across America, to create that alternative, to connect communities with reliable, efficient, trip time competitive service that really offers people both an alternative to the sort of dominant modes of transport in the US and create some opportunities and inducement for new travel so that we can connect folks. And we aspire to do that everywhere that rail makes sense in the US. Now, rail doesn't make sense everywhere, for sure, but our network, if you look at it from 1971, 50 years ago when we started, and you look today, there are many aspects that look very, very similar. In fact, some places we have less service, some places we have more, but the nation looks remarkably different from 1971. We've added 120 million people to the nation. In the Southeast, we've doubled our population in that period of time. And Amtrak's service in the South broadly is actually, Virginia aside and North Carolina aside, is less than it was in 1971. So when we look at what the nation needs long-term to create a sustainable, low carbon, reliable capacity for mobility, we think passenger rail has just a huge role to play. And we look at our network, we look at the infrastructure in the United States. The US has the largest rail network in the world of any nation by a factor of 2, not a often heralded statistic. The issue is we just don't use really very much of it at all for passenger trains. And that's a choice. That is not a de facto requirement, because passenger and freight can't work together. And in our view, have to work together and have to do more both for the nation, because we aren't going to solve the crisis of, really the twin crisis of mobility and population growth and climate without a lot more rail. And so with that as a backdrop around our thinking, and we've been doing a lot of elements here to sort of create, as I mentioned, sort of that goal with a couple of strategic priorities. One, which is investing in our core assets, many of which are very old, and many of which need to be expanded to do more. So that's our fleet, our infrastructure, our stations. And then looking across that map, that nation, a wide view, and seeing where does passenger rail make sense? Where do we have infrastructure? Where could additional infrastructure be improved or expanded so that we can serve more markets, we can serve more people and create more trips, and do so with the lowest amount of public investment required, because we're stewards of all of your tax dollars here and at the federal level. And of course, we partner with public entities like the Commonwealth. So we have a responsibility to try and achieve this goal in the most efficient way that we can. So all of those things are really the basis in which we sort of, and kind of the mindset which we have, and then we were able to start this conversation with the secretary. And Virginia undoubtedly is special. Its relationship to the Northeast Corridor, which is the passenger main line of North America, does give it in a way a leg up, because we have this unique situation of all these trains coming to Washington and the ability to connect those trains to Virginia and create both new markets that are beyond Virginia, but really cater to serving those Virginians looking to head on the north to destinations on the Northeast Corridor and vice versa. And we have the equipment and facilities and people to be able to make some of these things happen. But all of that, to be able to harness that, took real focus and leadership from the Commonwealth, and a plan that had taken all of the work of these past decades, synthesized it, and most importantly, it led to that engagement with CSX as a sort of threshold question about, is there a path forward to work together? We have broad relationships with all of our host railroads and work together in partnership on many, many things. But quite often it really does take that kind of impetus of another party and sort of other elements into the equation that can help move and sort of change dynamics in the network. And I think we have that with Virginia. And the benefits for us are really simple, right? We're going to be able to see a doubling of service in Virginia. We're going to connect more communities. We're going to connect those communities to our already thriving Northeast Corridor business. We'll be able to more efficiently use equipment, more efficiently use crews, and in the process achieve those bigger goals of creating opportunity, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, and strengthening communities, and supporting our long distance network, of course, which will benefit from the investments and improvements here beyond the state supported corridor service. So many things really added up in this deal, and the company quite quickly said, this is the kind of program that we should be investing in. These are the sort of partnerships we are looking for, where we can find interested parties who share the vision and who have the capabilities. And so in that sense, it was an easy decision. Now, coming up with $1 billion is not an easy task, and that's no thing you do lightly. But the benefits here are just very clear, and I think it's a great model, as I've said before to the secretary, that she has helped to put on the table for states all around the nation about how to think about expanding service and making those tough decisions within a state about how you grow capacity to serve state needs and also be part of the interstate network here that's so vital to the region.
Danny, may I just add one thing? It's so interesting to me, Stephen. I can remember being in the meeting with you as if it were this morning. It was just so vivid, laying out this possibility, this opportunity. And when Amtrak let us know that they could see this as a part of their strategic plan and could possibly be a partner with us, that really gave us the foundation to build this proposal, this initiative. And it truly is a win for passenger rail, for commuter rail, bringing in the Virginia Rail Express, for CSX, expanding capacity and reliability for freight. We have an amazing chief of rail named Mike McLaughlin, and he always said, I'm chief of rail, passenger and freight, and he does an amazing job. But pulling together something that was a win-win-win, and knowing that we had Amtrak with us, gave us the commitment we needed to work through an amazing year and a half. And keeping everybody at the table through COVID was an interesting experience. So anyway, we're happy to be talking to you today.
Excellent. And former president of Amtrak, Alex Command, I think, spoke to one of our annual meetings in the early 2000s and said, if Virginia had never sold the RF&P, the Northeast Corridor would not be a Northeast Corridor, it would be an East Coast corridor by now. It would go from Boston all the way through Virginia. And so I applaud you both for really kind of righting a wrong of Virginia having sold the RF&P and bringing it back in and understanding how important rail is to the Commonwealth of Virginia. Secretary Valentine, I'm going to read this verbatim. We got 100 questions. This comment came from someone who lives along the your home corridor between Roanoke and Charlottesville all the way to DC. And she said, first, I want to thank Secretary Valentine for all you've done to establish and promote rail travel from Lynchburg to points north. It's by far the best way to travel to DC, Baltimore, and New York. We are forever in your debt.
Oh my gosh.
Are there any plans for another Northeast regional train from Roanoke, Lynchburg, Charlottesville north. And I figured I would give you an opportunity to answer that question directly.
Okay, well, that is such a lovely question, by the way. I say thank you. And the answer is yes. That when we were able to announce the definitive agreements on March 30th, knowing that we were going to construct a bridge across the Potomac dedicated to passenger and freight, it opened up many opportunities for the Commonwealth. And this particular one required negotiations with Norfolk Southern, but with that capacity, we were able to negotiate with Norfolk Southern. We are adding a second train in FY22 from Roanoke, Lynchburg North, and we'll be expanding and extending that train, both trains actually, over to the New River Valley into, Christiansburg, Blacksburg, Virginia Tech. It has been a dream for a very long time. The plan in 2009 was, where was the most underserved route in Virginia? And it turned out to be Lynchburg to Washington. And I remember the conversation I had with Governor Kane at the time and Secretary of Transportation Pierce Homer. I asked Delegate David Toscano to join me from Charlottesville, and I had 3 Republicans sign on to this request, and that was, was it possible with some of our funding, it cost $17.5 million to launch this very first Amtrak Virginia train. And, from $17.5 million to announcing a $3.7 billion initiative 12 years later, it has been quite a journey. But to answer the question, yes, we are expanding and expanding and extending to the western part of Virginia. Our vision for passenger rail is to extend it to all corners within the Commonwealth and to be a gateway to the Northeast and the Southeast quarter. So that's the vision.
And that kind of goes into my next question for both of y'all, which is, how do you balance adding new routes versus additional frequency on existing routes? And that's something we as a rail advocacy community in Virginia sometimes have difficulty as well. Is what is the threshold? Is it 80% of Virginians or 90%? I think by 2040, with the transforming rail, will be at near 90% if the population growth and the census is correct. But how do each one of you see that balancing that opportunity with limited resources between the two?
Stephen, do you want to start or?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. From Amtrak's perspective, we are always looking at service and from a couple of different angles. First and foremost, as I think many will know, right, the ability to serve a market, to provide service, is a complicated sort of amalgamation of different factors and assets. We have in the rail mode this integration between the equipment, the facilities, and the infrastructure. All three have to come together. And so I'd say the sort of premise of the question probably needs to start with the idea that it's not the same to be able to add frequency to existing routes and start new service. They tend to be quite different tasks and have different costs and different timelines associated with them. So in many cases, adding additional frequencies is the more affordable and faster choice. And that's simply because you have equipment on a route. Can you turn it more and use it again? You have crew that's already familiarized and trained and there. You tend to have facilities that are already there to support existing infrastructure. And really importantly, you have stations that are there in place. So we always are looking to see, is there, with the existing assets we have, is there more service that we can sort of squeeze out, that can get into the market and provide meaningful opportunities? Because in our view, most corridors, depending on quarter length, 3 trips round trips a day are sort of the typical kind of ideal kind of minimum service level. It's not in every case is that right, but you really, if you can, you want to have that sort of morning, midday, and afternoon, evening departures. And so we're always looking to see where that level of service makes sense and how we can get that on existing routes. As it relates to new service, we are always start with trying to understand demand. Where can passenger rail make a difference? Where can we get trip times and capacity and connections that work? Because passenger rail service is not the right choice for every market. We've got to be clear about what the mode does well, and we also have to be clear about the routes and what routes can support the kind of trip times that are necessary to be competitive or sort of in the ballpark with other modes. But in a place like the Commonwealth, to use the Secretary's example of Lynchburg and Roanoke, quite clearly we had big population center, a lot of travel and demand to places that Amtrak already served. And the question was, how do we fill that gap? And of course, across the map in America, you see tons of places like this, whether it's Nashville, Chattanooga, Atlanta, or whether it's Houston to Dallas, or whether it's Las Vegas to Los Angeles. There are many, many markets where there are existing really strong flows, and the question is, how do you serve them? So we're trying to do both. We've asked for a lot of support from Congress and the administration to be able to bring dollars and resources to this task. Already at Amtrak, we are actively supporting several new routes. The Gulf Coast between Mobile and New Orleans, maybe one that folks are familiar with today. But the best services we have are those services that really are thinking about the network in an integrated fashion. And that's what we've got in Virginia, which is looking at, where can they add service? Where can we expand service? And to think about that holistically, making use of the assets that are in place, and how to do that sustainably, because you've got to manage the costs. These projects take a long time. They take a lot of commitment, and they can span many generations, frankly, of political cycles. And so you've got to always be able to stand up and articulate the benefit and value and the stewardship here. And I think that's what's been really remarkable about Virginia. They've made those investments. The investments have paid off, and that's built a foundation, I think, of support and understanding that's allowed this program to continue to grow.
Secretary Valentine, any additions from Virginia's perspective?
I will just add that, when it comes to extending and expanding, it's easier working with Amtrak. We have to start with the host railroads, and, because they own the tracks, and where can we find a win-win? When we were negotiating, trying to extend the service over to New River Valley, I remember talking to my team, and I would say, what's in it for Norfolk Southern? Why are we doing this? And so how do we improve both has been really, really important to us. I do believe that has helped bring everyone to the table. We're investing in quarters where both freight and passenger can improve. And it's allowing us to focus, which I know is something very important to Stephen and Amtrak, on performance and reliability and customer service. So it is a true negotiation of what we're all able to bring to the table. And I really see our role is creating the opportunities. In Virginia, we see such demand for rail that communities are willing to start with bus service to demonstrate the demand, even as we're doing ridership studies. And so I will say that we're really fulfilling a need and a desire of Virginians to have multimodal access. And we believe this is one of the most important. And so we've made that commitment, and we're very pleased to have the partners with us.
And your comment kind of builds off one of my other questions. What are the benefits and challenges of owning right-of-way and trackage versus kind of the old model in Virginia a little bit, and maybe our current model still of kind of renting capacity from the freight railroads, both now Virginia and obviously Amtrak with the Northeast Corridor. Both of you control rail assets, and I think that's exciting for the future. But I'm sure there's also challenges that were considered during the negotiation process.
I will just say that, that was a very serious consideration for us. We do not operate trains. We have expertise in operators. We have Amtrak operating our trains, which we're very pleased about. And on the commuter side, we have Virginia Rail Express. In Governor Northam's omnibus transportation package, which really restructured transportation funding and made a financial commitment to a multimodal system. Within that legislation was the creation of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. It is that authority under the leadership of Jennifer Mitchell as chair and DJ Statler as executive director. They will own the right-of-way and the rail. They're able to design and deliver projects. They manage a 15-member board and really focusing on the mission of expanding and improving passenger rail. So that is how the Commonwealth has chosen to move forward with us.
Yeah, Danny, I would say that it's always a question about what is the best model for any given service. You're right to note that there are really those two models, those instances where the railroad infrastructure is owned by a public entity or Amtrak, as we do in the Northeast, but also in some other parts of the country, or whether we're a tenant, and vice versa, right? Because Amtrak's actually a huge host. We have thousands of trains a day on our infrastructure across the U.S. for commuter railroads and freight railroads. So the ownership does come with special responsibilities. There's no question, and it is something that needs to be entered into very seriously. And I think the Commonwealth has done that exactly, both in setting up an entity to do that and to really create the expertise and long-term stewardship of the assets, and then hire really talented folks like Mr. Stadler, my former colleague, and others who are prepared to manage that responsibility. But I think it can really work. And I would point to some other instances where Amtrak has leased infrastructure from freight railroads, has become essentially the owner, sort of maintainer and developer of the infrastructure. Freight railroads have been able to continue to operate their service, operate efficiently, but the infrastructure has been able to be brought up to the level of performance and reliability that passenger demands. And I think that can be a really effective model in a number of instances. So I think there's a whole range here of opportunity, and what's really key is that are together, Amtrak, freight colleagues, commuter colleagues, state DOTs, we all, our federal partners obviously, are looking at how to make more use and how to optimize this network. It's an incredible asset that we as a nation have built, primarily by private companies, but operating under public charters that gave them the rights to operate and provide common carriage for freight and passenger initially, until we essentially absorb that responsibility for them, with the expectation that they would support us using their infrastructure to deliver it. So I think we have a lot of tools to use, and my hope is that there's more and more consensus growing around the need for rail to grow, and with that, resources to make it happen, and that I think will drive a lot of additional opportunity and growth.
And kind of building off of that a little bit, Stephen, one of the historic things, thanks to the Secretary's leadership here in Virginia with creation of that Passenger Rail Authority, one of the things we read in the rail trade magazines are about corridors either being abandoned or no longer being utilized because of changing freight shipments or whatnot. Do you think there should be some type of federal program, maybe at the FRA, maybe at Amtrak, for federal ownership of corridors that may be abandoned, so that they may not have nationwide importance today, but you talked about population growth in 20, 30 years, that corridor may be very important for connectivity between different communities. And it's better to try to get it under public ownership today than allow it to get chopped up and cut up and returned or whatnot.
Yeah, Danny, I do think, and I would say, I do think that states are keeping a strong eye out, as is Amtrak, looking all across the network to make sure that we retain these assets. Clearly, we're in a very different time period than post-Staggers, sort of mass abandonment and the creation of the short line industry. Now, short lines are sort of widely sought after, and there's a lot of opportunity out there. Folks interested in finding ways to make parts of the network work for freight primarily. So I think that there are a lot of tools here, and I'd say that many of the state DOTs and Amtrak, we're always keeping our eye out to make sure, as you say, that there aren't pieces of the network that disappear here and are lost. And I would further suggest that this linear right-of-way of any type, particularly as we think about electrification and the need of our grid, is going to be very valuable for the public over time. So I think there's a recognition of the unique asset that is there with railroad right-of-way. But I do believe that where there are assets that are in jeopardy, that there are really good cases to be able to maintain them. And there's a whole process through the STB, whether it's for abandonment or conversion to trails, that does ensure that there are sort of the right folks are involved as these decisions are made. But I would say that class ones generally, through change in operating practices, PSR, et cetera, they have significantly reduced the utilization of infrastructure right now. Train volumes are down substantially across the network, even though traffic is not, and that's because they're running fewer trains that are much longer. And that is creating some differences out on the network. So we're paying attention to that and looking, certainly paying a lot of attention to potential mergers and other changes in the freight network to see how they would impact passenger rail. We're going to be very strong in our communication that the network needs to improve for passenger rail, certainly not go the other way.
Thank you, Steve. Secretary Valentine, a little bit earlier, you talked about the win-win-win of the Transforming Rail in Virginia program. And one of the comments that popped up was, not only do people have their I-95 stories, but now it's people have their I-81 stories. They're just as common. Do you see kind of the secondary freight benefits to Virginia's Transforming Rail program benefiting freight getting trucks off the road a little bit?
Oh, no, I think it's a very important part. The Port of Virginia moves about 4 million containers a year. We just completed an $800 million expansion at the port, at NIT, and at the Virginia International Gateway. We are now dredging at the port, dredging and widening, so that by 2024, we will once again be the deepest port on the East Coast. And, through the pandemic, it's been just so interesting as we're all living through this, but the capacity of the port matched global demand at the right time. So focusing on the movement of goods and the logistics that requires is a huge priority for us. The port moves more by freight rail, about 35%. They'd like to go to 40%. They move more by rail than any port on the East Coast of the United States. We would like to build on that. They have barge service to the Richmond Marine Terminal, but they also have rail service out to the Virginia Inland Port along 81. We have a program within the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, which really focuses on access for businesses to be able to move goods from trucks to rail. We have grant programs. So it's a true multimodal opportunity. So this partnership that we're talking about today, Transforming Rail, is also a great opportunity to improve freight rail. And so we have really entered this with that spirit, that we are, we want to be able to improve freight operations for all of us. And when I had the opportunity to speak before Congress, I was invited to talk about this with House T&I, and Congressman and Chairman DeFazio was there, listening to our story, just the importance of bringing all of these resources and benefits together. And he has posed the question, what could we do better? And I would just say, looking to our federal partners, if it was possible for us to apply for federal grants where we could apply for funding, even if it were matched with funds from states, to actually improve rail networks or a series of projects that could really make a difference. I think that would be a huge step forward. And I also think looking at programs that are more collaborative, things where we're not set up always to be competitors, but actually collaborators, partners in trying to get work done, whether it's freight, commuter and passenger rail, rail and transit. This project affects highways, transit with VRE, rail. We don't fit into a neat category. And we just believe that it is a platform for multimodal solutions. And so anyway, so we're always trying to make that case. And to get back to your original question, yes, it's really important for rail.
Thank you. And kind of building off of that, one of the things we've always talked about with our congressional delegation, especially recently, is, with Virginia doing all these investments, if there is a strong federal program that comes out of a bipartisan infrastructure bill or the new Invest Act, making sure that Virginia is at the front of the line. And Mr. Gardner, where do you kind of see the federal investments? Do you see a consistent federal funding coming about either this year or in the coming years?
Well, I think you probably have a whole Zoom call that's in. I agree with your premise there. So I'll start with the affirmation that yes, I think fundamental to what we're all trying to do here is a long-term partnership for investment. And I agree completely with the Secretary that the current programs are not really set up, and in fact make it really hard to bring federal dollars from sort of different pots together to fund a program of improvement that spans a variety of assets. And of course, in a nation like ours with robust systems and dense and growing economies and growing population, you've got to think about it at the system level. Things have to be done together in coordination, and our 20th century kind of program structure just doesn't reflect it and really needs to be addressed. But even if we did that, which we should, and hopefully Congress will, and we share in the advocacy for that, you've got to have the resources. And the big question, as folks have probably been familiar with Amtrak's proposal for corridor development nationwide, and certainly folks are probably familiar with the many, many, many billions of dollars we need to invest in the Northeast Corridor to both rehabilitate, but also improve and expand that asset. Those programs are generational and they will take decades. We're not launching projects that can be done next year or that can be done in a couple of years. This is about transforming our infrastructure and our mobility systems here in the United States. It's not going to be done overnight. Just as the highway system, the interstate system, the national highway system, we're not done in 5 years. They weren't done in a decade. It took us, 40 years to undertake and deliver the bulk of that program. So we need a long-term structure to support this. We need a path that doesn't just allow us to launch projects, it allows us to complete projects. And that means we need funding over the duration of decades, not 5 years or 3 years. So we're making that case that there are bills in both the House and the Senate right now to create a passenger rail trust fund. You could certainly argue that probably what would be most intelligent is to have a universal transportation infrastructure trust fund that can fund all of these big programs and projects. But there's the sort of Hunger Games that goes out there amongst all the different modes who are sort of competing for the scraps because it's, the pie's not big enough to do what we all know needs to be done. But we are strong supporters of creating a dedicated funding source. And I will say that I think that a lot of people understand this. It's hard to do. And right now there's great conversations about investing in passenger rail, which we're overjoyed about, of course. But I'm still worried that in the end, what we're going to get is a bolus of dollars that are available here relatively in the near term. It will take a long time for those dollars to actually find their way into the ground for a whole host of very legitimate reasons. You can't scale up overnight. We have a huge supply chain to build, a huge workforce to build, all the normal environmental processes we must go through and the good planning. And we'll be constricted about what we can start because we won't know what we can finish. That's really the problem, is that, we need to know not just the dollars between now and 5 years from now. We need to know what's going to be between year 6 and year 10, and year 11 and year 15, so that we can launch the kind of really transformative work that we've started here in Virginia, but I know the Secretary is anxious to continue, as are we. A lot more to do. Looking at the S-Line, a perfect example of a great project that we now, through the Virginia's acquisition of infrastructure, have the raw material, but it's going to take money and time to turn that into a functional asset that will just bring huge value for that Southeast corridor and connection between Virginia, North Carolina, and the Northeast corridor. So please join us in asking for this. It's not easy to get, but it is going to be essential for this program to create the long-term transformation we're looking for.
Excellent. And we'll make sure to get that message out to our folks as well. And the last question, and thank you again for your time, is hopefully an easy one. How will everyday Virginians benefit from transforming rail in Virginia? And I'll start with Secretary Valentine.
Thank you very much. If I might just add a comment to Stephen's remarks, the way we have laid out transforming rail in Virginia, we did acquire the S-Line. We also acquired an east-west route from Doswell, Virginia, over to Clifton Forge. Again, preserving, Danny, as I think you alluded to early on in our discussion today, but we have preserved those corridors for future investment. But we also, we are moving forward with phases 1 and 2 of our plan, which is going to allow for hourly service along the corridor between Washington and Richmond. We are expanding and enhancing service over to Newport News and Norfolk. We're preserving those corridors because we are doing the constructing the bridge dedicated to passenger and freight. We're able now to, after these negotiations in Norfolk Southern, we're expanding the rail service from Roanoke, Lynchburg North. We are extending that service over to the New River Valley, and we're creating a true statewide rail plan. We believe that it's going to enhance the mobility, connectivity, access, economic development and opportunity, and really create a path for a multimodal future, which I believe is going to be a part of all of our transportation networks. I will say that as we're looking at phase 1 and 2 today, we have developed plans and negotiated those plans with CSX for phases 3 and 4. So should there be federal infrastructure funds, Virginia is positioned to use them now with a plan that we have, because our vision really is to create 4 tracks from Richmond to DC, separating passenger and freight and allowing us all to have control of our destinies. which is really where, I believe that we want to go. It is a tremendous opportunity. I will make one caveat. Through the town of Ashland, there will only be 2 tracks, by the way. So we've negotiated that. I'm imagining some folks from Ashland may be listening to me, but rest assured you'll have 2 tracks. But no, it's just a great opportunity for all of us to work together to create a new vision for transportation. It's moving the most people and goods as we can across all modes with equity and access and environmental sustainability in mind. I think it can be a really bright future. And I just look forward to our continued partnership with Amtrak, Virginians for High-Speed Rail, and all of those who have supported us and are interested in this. We hope to create a template that can be used and at least explored across the country. So thank you.
And I'll just add by saying in the simplest service terms, you're going to get double the service, radically improved reliability, and some over time reduced trip times, and that will open up all sorts of opportunities for people to visit friends and family, work, expand cultural connections. I mean, the value of mobility is so broad and so essential to our quality of life, to our sort of self-definition here in the United States. And I think we will really be able to create a service that has so much more utility and value for Virginians across the Commonwealth with this program. And as the Secretary said, it's just sort of, just the beginning. And I think the Commonwealth and Virginia will be in really excellent position to go seek additional dollars, because we've got this really strong basis of the current program and all the planning work, and we'll be aggressively doing that because there's a lot more to come. But a huge sort of achievement to get this program in place, and Amtrak's just really excited by the opportunity and deeply thankful for the partnership and the support, both from the Commonwealth and everyone in the Commonwealth who I know has been laboring for a long time to see these sort of investments translate into service.
And Danny, I'll add cost effective.
Yes.
When it's challenging when you're making the business case for this. It is there. We are creating the capacity and the expansion for 1/3 of the cost of building 1 lane of road 50 miles in each direction. So it's cost effective, it's connecting us all, and it allows us to focus on performance, reliability, and our customers.
Thank you. And thank you both, Secretary Valentine and Mr. Gardner, for taking the time out of your day for speaking to, I think we had over 300 plus people join us today for this very exciting conversation and learning more about transforming rail in Virginia. So I greatly appreciate it on behalf of Virginians for High-Speed Rail. Sorry. And I just want to briefly show for those online, our next event is this September, kind of building off of this conversation with Director Mitchell, Director of the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, and DJ Stadler, the Executive Director of our Rail Authority, about what's next. And Virginia is doing our rail plan. So this will be a nice opportunity to kind of learn building off of today. So thank you all again, and thank you to our sponsors for participating and for helping make this event for free. I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, Stephen.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciated it. Bye-bye.